Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Joe Cannon, and this is episode number 33 of the Joe Cannon Health Podcast. I'm back for another week where we talk about exercise, health, fitness, wellness, dietary supplements, everything under the sun to help you stay healthy and better understand this world of health and wellness. No hype, no spin, no testimonials, just the facts, hopefully in plain English. This week, I want to bring back a guest I had a few weeks ago, Jim Menz. We are going to talk about heart health, and the genesis of this interview is actually Jim's book that he wrote on heart health. Jim wrote a textbook on heart, all things related to the heart, and it was such an engaging book that I thought it was worthy to not only bring your attention, but also have a heart-to-heart talk, pun intended, on how the heart works. And we'll talk about a whole bunch of other things, not just heart anatomy, but things that people should be thinking about. Jim tells some interesting stories about the heart and how to stay healthy that I think people should be aware of. And his book is also quite interesting. As I read his book, I noticed that he's written the only book that I've ever seen that worked in the movie Die Hard and Hans Gruber. I've never seen that in an exercise physiology book before, but it's also very easy to understand, which I think is worthy of anybody who is interested in this topic. But again, the main thing we're going to talk about this week is going to be heart health and anything related to heart, like blood pressure. We'll talk about blood pressure today as well. But before we get into any of that, let's bust the myth of the week. And this is a myth that I actually discuss in several seminars I give. And it goes like this. Does the FDA regulate dietary supplements? When I ask that question of audiences, most people say no, the FDA does not regulate dietary supplements. Well, turns out they do. Yes, there is a regulation of dietary supplements, and you can easily see the regulation, see the whole darn thing. Just go on your computer, go on your search engine of choice, and type in 5 letters, D-S-H-E-A, D-S-H-E-A. Those letters stand for the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. The Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. It's pronounced DSHEA, and the law, the regulation, if you will, has been around since 1994. I think a lot of people have not heard of it, so that's why I give you the letters so you can easily see the regulation yourself. Essentially, this is a bunch of regulations that dietary supplement companies need to adhere to when they create supplements. For instance, one of the things that I think confuses people is that people confuse regulation with approval. The FDA technically does not approve dietary supplements, but they do regulate their production, and they do regulate what can go into dietary supplements. That DSHEA regulation actually even has a definition of what a dietary supplement is. Generally, I get why people say there's no regulation because, as a rule, supplement companies don't necessarily have to go to the FDA and say, hey, can I make a new dietary supplement? For instance, if you can find the supplement, the ingredient in the supplement, if you can find it in food, generally you can find it, you can make it into a dietary supplement. However, if the supplement company is making something that contains an ingredient that has not been used before, has not been consumed by people before, then they would have to go to the FDA and say, hey, is it okay if we use this in our product? And they would have to actually show proof that their product is safe. So I understand why people would confuse approval with regulation. And I also understand why some people would think that there was no regulation, because one of the parts of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act is that technically companies are on the honor system. The FDA is not going through all the companies on a regular basis with a white glove and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Most companies do follow the rules and are honorable, and they make quality products. However, there have been companies in the past that have not. And when the FDA does find these companies, they often make them remove their products from the market. Sometimes they are even fined, sometimes a lot of money, and they usually find their way on what I sometimes call the FDA wall of shame. There actually is a part of the FDA website where you can see the supplements that have been caught not playing by the rules. And if you want to actually see a list of them, and there is quite a few of them, go in your search engine of choice and just type in these words, FDA tainted supplements, FDA tainted supplements. That'll most likely take you to the page of the FDA website where you can see a list of violations that they have found over the years. And it's quite a long list, but it's actually not as big as the number of dietary supplement companies that are out there that actually do follow the rules. And I do think most of them are following the rules. But having investigating supplements for over 2 decades, I can tell you, there have been some bad apples out there. Fortunately, I think the supplement industry has been stepping up and cleaning up things better than it had been in the past, which is always a good thing. But again, rule of thumb, yes, there is a regulation, but generally the FDA does not have to approve supplements unless the company is making something that contains an ingredient that has not been consumed regularly by people. So myth busted. Yes, the FDA does in fact regulate dietary supplements. So for the remainder of our time this week, I want to have a conversation with Jim Menz. Again, we're going to talk about all things heart health. One of the things you'll find interesting about Jim is that when he uses a big word, he breaks it down so you can understand it. He actually tells where the derivation of the word comes from. And for, a word nerd like myself, I actually love that because, I like trivia like that. So when I give lectures, I often like to do the same thing many times. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll talk about all things and basically have a conversation, and we go in a few other directions here and there, but hopefully you're going to find it quite entertaining. So without further ado, let me jump right into my interview with Jim Menz. Here we go. So I want to bring Jim Menz back again for another week of fun and education in terms of health, because we had such great response for the last time he was on where we talked about migraine headaches. And I know Jim has written actually 2 books on the heart. And interesting enough, they're geared towards nurses, but having gotten advanced copies of them myself, I think his books are very valuable to anybody taking an anatomy or physiology class. Even they're so well written. And Jim, my hat's off to you if I wore a hat, but I was thinking that even when I was in high school, I would have loved to have had a book like this because you broke everything down so well. You even did the things that I always wanted to have in most of all of my textbooks was tell me where the words come from. What's the derivations of these big $3 words you sometimes see? And I love to see the fact that you actually broke them down and you told a whole bunch of trivia, which the trivia nerd in me was loving. And I thought you'd be the person to go to talk about the heart. Because I honestly think, I don't know about you, but my opinion is when people think about exercise, they think about muscles, biceps. And again, it's usually only biceps, glutes, and abs. It's about the only thing that people think about in terms of muscles. And they forget about the most important muscle in their body, which is their heart. Oh my goodness. It's like
Yeah.
we take it for granted that it continues to beat for over 100 years. And if you take care of it, you're probably never going to have very many problems with it at all. So I thought you'd be the person to, shed a lot of light on this and give people, again, a newer appreciation for their heart. See, I used a little bit from your book there. Again,
Yes, I saw what you did there. That was good.
I appreciate that. So I don't know. So let's talk about this. So first up, how does the heart work? Because I really don't think that message really comes across to people. We don't think about the heart too much. So overall, how does the heart actually work?
And basically, it works like a muscle. Okay. How does a muscle work? Well, when I teach gross muscle anatomy and function, kinesiology, if you will, I said, think about a muscle. The muscles that move your arm are easy to picture. I got a muscle that's up here near my shoulder. It runs down below my elbow. It's called the biceps. That's basically like a really strong rubber band or one of those elastic bands at the gym, and you stretch it really tight, even when your muscle is quote unquote relaxed. If you are just as loosey-goosey as you can be, that muscle is still under a lot of tension. And we know that if you've ever seen, read, or had the joyous experience of tearing a muscle or the tendons that connect that muscle. If you tear that bicep tendon out of your forearm below your elbow, that bicep muscle doesn't just sort of lay down flat. it flies way up, but kind of like the old lampshade analogy, it springs way up and it coils way up. And so you have this real big dead spot, and then this little ball of muscle, this little like golf ball up by your shoulder, because that rubber band is already under a lot of tension. And so a muscle is like a tight, strong rubber band that has a magic power. And the magic power is that it can make itself get shorter. Now, when we really get into the weeds, you look at the microscopic components of actin and myosin, and there's these protein strands that are pulling on each other and pulling the ends towards the middle, and the whole thing gets shorter. And that's what makes us move our arms and legs and such. Well, the microscopic anatomy is actually quite similar. You have proteins that are pulling on each other. And in this case, the heart isn't like a long, stretchy rubber band. It's kind of looped into a few different chambers and circles, but it basically behaves in a lot of ways similarly to when you're doing your bicep curls. Certain proteins have to grab other proteins and pull on them, and then other things have to happen to make them let go. And so you get into things like elasticity. It's just like a rubber band. So if you stretch it, it's going to pull back. And if you stretch it, it's going to pull back. And if you make it work harder, it's going to get stronger. And if you don't nourish it and take care of it, it's going to get weaker. And if you pollute it, it's going to get weaker. And if you stretch it too much, you can hurt it. So if we start to kind of get our heads around the muscles that we can sort of visualize, the biceps, the quadriceps, like you said, the glutes, the pecs, the abs, and then to kind of take it from there. And then, of course, there's some really key differences as well. But if we kind of start our paradigm there by going, it's a muscle. It's a muscle with certain chambers and shapes and pumps. But at the microscopic level, that's really what's happening. It's a ball of protein fibers tugging on each other so that certain parts squeeze down and other parts relax and let go. And then that has to be timed. So it's a lot more intricate than that, but that's a pretty good jumping off spot.
And you're right. It is incredibly intricate. And one of the things that I try to get across to people is that, unlike the biceps, where it's voluntary muscle, you have to think before you flex your bicep, our hearts actually contract on their own. We don't have to think for them to contract, which is a good thing, because you wouldn't want to have to keep thinking, contract my ventricles, contract my atria, and
Exactly.
do it, in coordination with each other. Otherwise, we would be in very big trouble very quickly.
Well, you wouldn't be able to focus on anything else. And one of the things that I teach, when I do the muscle phys, I said muscles don't think. When I'm speaking of the skeletal muscles like biceps and the pecs and like that muscle doesn't do anything until this master control center called the nervous system tells it to do something. And there's a signal that comes from the nervous system that innervates or controls some portion of the muscle that says, oh, pull. And then you bunch of fibers over here, let go. It's basically go, stop. Yeah. Technical term, excitatory, inhibitory. But basically it's go or let go to a certain section of the muscles. The heart is so specialized that it has its own sort of miniature control center. It can generate its own signal, because a muscle doesn't do anything until an electrical signal goes into those fibers and says go or stop. But the heart has its own little self-contained. That's why someone can have like a brain injury, but their heart still beats.
Yeah, it is amazing when you consider how complex it is. I'm always amazed that we just don't fall apart. I just, when you get into the molecular and the cellular levels of all this stuff.
I swear I was thinking that last night. It's a miracle any of us are holding together. It's like, how did we even make it?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's
and
so complex.
And that's a discussion for even another podcast. But so in terms of exercise, what are some of the benefits on the heart from exercise? What does exercise do to the heart?
Well, we can go back to one of the basic principles of exercise, which is called the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demand. Your whole body creates specific adaptations. If I want my arms to get bigger, I have to lift heavy things with my arms. If I lift heavy things with my arms, the muscles in my legs aren't going to get bigger, because that wouldn't help me to lift bigger things with my arms. So there's a specific nature of the response. Your body is going to respond in such a way that it gets better at doing whatever it is we make it do. And similar to working the other muscles. Again, I'm constantly using that analogy. My biceps or my quadriceps in my legs, we have to do something called an overload. Another one of the principles we both taught. You have to make it do a little more than it is accustomed to doing. And of course, we both know the key is a measured amount more, because you can overdo it. I overload it to a measured amount, the body responds. And it works the same way with the heart. Well, the heart is a muscle that when it squeezes and relaxes, it pumps blood. It pumps blood to deliver oxygen. So I'm going to exercise in such a way that increases my demand for oxygen. I'm going to walk, I'm going to run, I'm going to hit the heavy bag, the elliptical machine. I'm going to do those things, Zumba class, whatever it is. I'm going to do things that require my muscles to consume a lot of oxygen. So my lungs are going to have to be breathing more rapidly, and that heart is going to start beating. And again, at a good measured amount, so we don't overdo it, but we make the heart do a little bit more than it's used to doing. Then we get our nutrition and our rest, and the body responds by building that back up. You see this in folks who start that and then, we're at the time of the year where a lot of folks are kind of dropping off their resolutions, but the folks who are sticking with it now you're at the end of 2 months. There are a lot of folks who said, I'm going to walk 1 mile a day. And they started, a few days after New Year's, and it was really tough. And now it's 6 or 7 weeks later, and they go, you know what? This isn't so bad. I set out to walk a mile. I just walked 1.5 miles. Yeah, I went to do 1.5 miles. I did too. It wasn't half bad, because the heart is responding in a similar way, not exactly, but a similar way to if we start doing I like comparing it to strength training, because there are some common grounds there. So we start exercising the heart, it responds, gets stronger, starts beating more blood each time it squeezes. And you start doing things like your activity level can go up, and you're not as fatigued, and you're not breathing as hard. And it's really cool.
And strength training also is a benefit to the heart as well, correct?
Yeah. Now, with the strength training, the heart rate, it's going to rise fairly quickly, because the very nature of strength training. You think about if you're doing a set of, like I said, overhead presses with a certain weight, that very bout of exercise typically lasts about maybe 30, 35, 45 seconds or so. So it's not going to be that continuous long, but for that amount of time, you are creating an oxygen debt that has to be repaid. And so you will get elevated heart rate. That's why a lot of folks kind of split the difference there, and they'll do lighter weight training in that circuit style. Do my chest press over here, my shoulder press over here, and don't go too heavy, and do a fair number of reps. Maybe do 15, 20 reps per station, and keep it moving. Keep it maybe 30 seconds break in between, so you don't get full oxygen recovery. You don't get that full rebound. So your heart rate never comes back down, and you're kind of maintaining something of a cardiac pitch throughout that cycle.
That's pretty much what I do in the gym these days myself. I'm jumping around from one machine, one exercise to another exercise, mostly because I think I got OCD as I get older, and I just don't want to sit there anymore. I just don't want to sit there and wait a minute and get my watch out, or like, no, I'm moving. And so I'm bouncing around from one exercise to an exercise. For me, time goes by a lot quicker when I'm jumping around. I get aerobic benefit on my heart. You get the muscles. You don't have to spend an hour in the gym unless you want to. And I get it. I often do myself, but you don't have to kill yourself in the weight room all the time. You can get a lot done in a pretty short period of time.
It's more about health now than performance. There's a lot of folks are exercising for competition. A lot of folks are motivated more by wellness, and there's health and wellness is a beautiful and wonderful thing.
How soon would it take for the heart to start experiencing benefits of exercise? Just something that happens in one day, or is it going to take a year?
Typically measured in a few weeks. And this is one of the hardest parts of being a conscientious personal trainer, is that I was always going up against these folks who saw something on TV, but wait, there's more in the comfort of your own home, 7 minutes a day, 3 times a week. And they show the guy who says, I lost 42 pounds. And then the fine print, it says he also stopped eating for a month. And so you typically have to kind of go on this faith. And I recall counseling several good friends who bought into it, and
Mm.
several folks who just fought me. And I said, you got to find something that is comfortable, makes your body feel good, and then keep with it. And you'll start to see those results usually within a month and a half. But you have to have a little bit of that leap of faith. And I've had folks just a month. Are you kidding? And this is part of why when I write an exercise program for someone, first thing I do is I give them one, if they're not paying me, I give them one and only one tip. Do this one thing 3 times a week for 3 straight weeks. And that weeds out 99% of everyone. Now, the person who comes back to me and says, okay, now let's add. But I like to add flexibility. I like to do a little modicum of some strength training and some compound movements, because what I tell them is, you're probably motivated by what? Losing weight. That's 99 out of 100. That's going to be the last thing that's going to manifest. You're going to look better later.
Yeah.
You get to feel better real soon, though. Within a week or two, you can start to notice a difference how you feel.
Yeah.
I like myself a little better. Get my shower, put in some good food, and I feel better. But I haven't lost any weight. I said, just enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I agree. So many people, and that's why I asked the question, because so many people are fixated on how long does it take. Years ago, I remember there was I think it was 6-minute abs. Then they came out with 5-minute abs, and they came with 4-minute abs or something along those lines. Everybody wants it tomorrow. It is true. And I'm sure there's some epigenetic changes that occur, maybe even that first exercise session, but you're probably not going to feel it for a little while. And you probably might feel a little bit quicker the closer you are to square one. Probably take a greater effort if you're already pretty darn fit versus if you haven't done anything for a long time, and you just maybe walk on the treadmill for 10 or 15 minutes. You may notice an improvement in your energy level and your sleep later on that night. But yeah, generally it's going to take a little bit of time before you're going to see some improvement, definitely in the heart structure and the function, and how well it's beating and pumping blood and all that stuff. And along the same lines, I had read an article a while ago, what's the minimum amount of exercise that benefits the body? And I think this article came out and said 5 minutes of exercise has been shown to improve brain function. And that's really interesting. I don't know if 5 minutes of exercise would, again, benefit the heart function, again, unless you're starting from square one. But what do you think about that? Is there a minimum dose of exercise that could improve the function, ability of our heart to work?
I've seen little snippets along those lines where 5 and 10 minutes. And like I said, unless someone is, the shop talk is deconditioned, which is kind of a nice way of saying being really out of shape. Someone who's, or maybe dealing with a condition, if there's a pathology, if they've had a diagnosis and they've been through respiratory or cardiac therapy and now they're starting over. So aside from someone really having to start from the ground up, the 5-minute thing is always comes back to me as being a little bit light, better than nothing. And of course, the thing is, if someone's reasonably healthy and they just commit to 5 or 10 minutes, a lot of times, again, I've done this, I've been exercising most of my adult life and, teach this stuff, but I've done the same thing where I do not want to pedal that bike for 30 minutes. I just don't want to do it. So I'll make a little deal. Just do your 10 minutes and some stretches. Do your 10 minutes. You'll be nice and warm. Do your stretches. I got to do stretches for my back. I had a back injury way back when, trying to lift with the big guys. Do your 10 minutes, do your stretches, and I'll let you off the hook. And then, of course, now it's 10 minutes. And how do you feel? You're warming up. You're feeling better. You got some endorphins going. Maybe put some tunes on. Put on that high energy Bee Gees Barry Manilow workout set, and and all of a sudden, okay, now it's 10 minutes. You feel better, and you're going, I may as well just kind of ride this thing out. So, but to your question, for me, most folks need to get into the 15 to 20 minute to really get a dose, because their exercise is dose response. There's a certain amount is good, then a little bit more is going to be really good, and then we got to be careful not to do too much, because now it can come back down. Now your benefit decreases, and as you and I both know, there's a lot of folks get hurt from doing too much, and sometimes it's pretty serious.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think people need to look at from the gestalt, if you will, the bigger picture. Exercise.
Big picture, well done.
Yeah. So again,
Again, with
exercise.
those $3 words, dude. I'm glad I
Yeah,
had my second cup of coffee. I mean,
I got a few $3 words in me. But again, exercise affects the heart and the other muscular systems and the nervous system and stuff like that. So I think start where you are. And there may not be a minimum amount of exercise for everybody on the heart function, but again, it would depend on what your starting point is. And if all you can do is say 5 minutes, then do 5 minutes, and maybe next week we're doing
and do
6.
5 minutes. And
Um,
exactly. And there's actually a stat that I mentioned in the book that for someone who is and I believe it's over the age of 65, but it might be 60, that a 10% improvement in fitness level corresponds with a 15% reduction in the risk of heart disease.
hmm,
If you think about if someone is capping out, and I mean, sometimes, and I've put folks on what I thought was a very gentle pace, 2.5 miles an hour, which is not a very rigorous pace to someone who's in reasonable health, thank God. But 2.5 miles an hour, and this person can't. You're thinking they're going to warm up for 5 minutes, and I'd always watch them very attentively. If they're 3 minutes in, they're starting to huff and puff, and we gotta bring them back down. So if I got someone who's capping out at 5 minutes,
right.
a 10% improvement is only another 30 seconds. So if they go from 5 to 5.5 minutes, they're already that's a 10% improvement in their fitness level. So the absolute number may seem kind of modest,
Hmm.
but as a percentage, you're really starting to do some things relatively quickly. And again, statistics and percentages being what they are, there's a correspondence there. You get someone to go from 5 minutes and then they're tapped out to 10, which is very attainable within the first couple of weeks.
You touched on a little bit ago on exercising too much on the heart, which made me think about overtraining syndrome. So can you briefly talk about that for those people who may not be aware of something called overtraining? Can you actually train too much, and what does that look like for the heart?
There's a classic graph, and I'm going to try and do this kind of visually, where the vertical axis is the benefit and the horizontal axis is some variable. It could be exercise, it could be calories, it could be sleep, it could be water. So let's use water as an example. If you have no water, you have no benefit, you have no life. So let's increase the amount of water you give a human being. In other words, move along the x-axis, and you're going to move upwards in your benefit. And then a little more water is more benefit, then a little more water. And then you get to the point where you're in the sweet spot. You have an optimum amount of water, top level benefit. If you go beyond the optimum amount, your benefit comes down. And if you keep drinking more water, you're at less benefit, and you can eventually kill yourself from something called, a word I learned from you, hyponatremia, which is low blood sodium. You can actually flush all your sodium. And I asked this to my kids in A&P, and I said, can too much water be a bad thing? And they said, it can kill you. Now, you can't live without water, but too much of it can kill you. So obviously, there's a sweet spot in the middle, and that's our job, is to find out optimum benefit beyond which too much of a necessary thing becomes a bad thing. Even that thing we call stress. Now, this is a thing about the heart. So we need a certain amount of that thing called stress in our lives. It's what motivates us to change.
Hmm.
Stress isn't a bad thing. It's a necessary thing. Too much stress becomes a bad thing. And exercise is the same way. Too
Yeah.
much of a very good thing can become a very bad thing. And we start doing things like breaking down the muscles so bad that you can't recover. We create an oxygen deficit within our own. That's why some folks will unfortunately have heart attacks and events. Remember that the heart is a muscle, and it's got to squeeze, and it's got to move the blood, except that the heart is also a muscle, so it needs blood and oxygen. So if we overexercise, we run too much, too hard, too fast. No, I'm going to finish. It's only one more mile, especially if we start getting a little competitive or a little obsessed. And we decide, I'm going to set this marker. I'm going to run my full hour today, and I'm not going to stop for any reason. And we can create such a bad oxygen debt within the heart itself that things go wrong. And So we want to make sure that, you listen to the body.
I was doing a seminar, I think about a year ago, and a guy came up to me at the end of the day and told me about a friend of his who was essentially working out. I think it was like 2 hours a day, every day. He told me, well, we know that, exercise lowers the heart rate. This guy's heart rate at rest, and he was a young guy, he was in his early 20s. His heart rate was about 95 beats a minute. I said, I suspect this guy isn't overtraining, because that's a classic sign. Your heart rate, as you said, there's that sweet spot where, exercise can actually lower your resting heart rate, but you do too much and it climbs back up again.
Well, his body's constantly trying to catch up. He's breaking his body down. The exercise works by overdoing it. You overdo it slightly. It's called that overload principle. You tax the body and you push it beyond the limit, but now you have to give it time to repair. You have to get your rest. You have to let that kind of catch up. Adaptation, the general adaptation syndrome, the gas model. It's called supercompensation.
Mm-hmm.
If I tear down a muscle because I'm lifting something, I'm not going to build it back up to where it was. I'm going to build it back up to where it's a little stronger than it was. Right. But that part takes time. And it sounds like this gentleman was never giving his body a break. He was never getting his rest. So he was constantly trying to catch up. Mm. And so you're trying to move the proteins and the oxygen, and he just never gave himself a chance to catch up. And I'll bet he was plateauing pretty good too. He probably wasn't making the gains, which unfortunately, especially a lot of young dudes, okay, I'm working out 2 hours a day. I'm not getting any gains. So what's my answer? I'm going to go to 2.5 hours every day.
Yeah.
Oh, guilty as charged. I'm not judging. You go back to the.
No, I'm with you. I've made that mistake myself when I was in my 20s. So the heart is a muscle like biceps. And when you work the biceps or the pecs or whatever, they get bigger. Does the heart get bigger with exercise?
It does. And to a limited extent, that's an okay thing. We do have to watch for excessive, what's the general term for when a muscle gets bigger? Hypertrophy. And again, to break it down, hyper, Hyper, means extra, excessive, more. Trophy or trophy, Trophy, it looks spelled the same way like you get an award. It means cell nourishment, growth, development. So hypertrophy means excess growth. Muscle got bigger. When it's the biceps or the deltoids, hey, it's cool. The muscles get bigger and we feel good. When it's the heart, we have to be careful. And you'll hear about people suffering from ventricular hypertrophy. And at first you go, well, wait a second, it's a muscle. Why isn't that a good thing? But there's a really big difference between, say, the heart and your biceps, is that your heart is in a really crowded spot. One of the things about the body, it's crowded in there. And so you have this pericardium, it's called. It's like a little sac. Peri meaning outer or around. There it is with the words again. My father was always very good at breaking down words for me when he taught physics and math and philosophy of all things. So I just thought the etymology, the study of the words, was always really helpful. Mm-hmm. Unlike the biceps, the heart is surrounded by stuff on all sides. You've got lungs to both sides. You've got ribs and a sternum, the breastbone in front. You've got vertebrae. So you have a cage, basically. It's really cool because it protects you. That's a vital organ. We can't live without it. So, if I get hit with a baseball and it hits me in the biceps and I got a deep bruise, it's sore and I'm cranky. If you took that same impact to the heart, it would kill you. So we humans surround it with ribs and stuff to protect it. A lot of muscle, tendons, blood vessels, a lot of structures, but that also limits the space. So we don't want the heart getting too big, which it's not really prone to doing unless it has to overexert all the time, like in the case of blocked blood vessels, high blood pressure. So to do that in a healthy heart, I don't want to discourage someone from exercising for fear that their heart's going to get too big. That it doesn't work that way. As long as the heart doesn't have to overexert all the time. That's one of the dangers of high blood pressure. Yeah. It makes the heart work extra hard all the time, so it never gets to kind of kick back. The heart is not like a muscle like these bodybuilder dudes have the big arms that are very likely to hypertrophy. It's not that specific type of fiber. The fibers in the heart are more built for, they're more like the Energizer Bunny. They just kind of go, go, go. They don't get all big and bulky necessarily. They're made for the long run, but they will hypertrophy in time. So as long as we don't have to make the heart overexert every second of every day, we're not going to get excessive hypertrophy. But the heart will respond. It's kind of the same way that you have these muscles in your legs that get really tired and crampy if you try and run a half mile. But then if you stay with it, in a few months, you're running 3 miles and your legs feel great.
Mm-hmm.
And, you notice guys who run a lot, they don't have those big jacked up bodybuilder thighs because they're not training that way. And they also have there's different types of muscle fibers. Some are more for the long endurance haul. They're called type 1 or slow twitch. And then some guys are just loaded with these type 2 fibers that are more built for the power and the blast. So the heart is more of that endurance muscle. It will respond to training, but as long as we don't make it overexert all the time, we avoid the excess hypertrophy.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good way of putting things. Related to that, there have been these news reports that have popped up over the last few years of basically young, fit people running marathons who unfortunately have just basically died of heart attacks. Some of these people, I think one guy was like 20, another one might have even been younger than that. I've not seen a good explanation why this is. It does appear, obviously, fortunately, be a rarity, but it does happen. The closest mechanism to why this might be happening is that when the heart beats, obviously, it expands and then it goes back to its normal shape, and that's part of the pumping process. Someone had put forth the notion that perhaps maybe in some people who were extremely aerobically fit, maybe the heart elasticity did not go back to its normal shape. And over time, this may basically cause blood clots or cause a heart attack. Have you seen anything on this?
I didn't see the elasticity factor related specifically to marathons or sports, although that is, it seems plausible to me. Like we go back to, say, in the event of that left ventricular hypertrophy, where someone who has their arteries are clogged, and so their heart has to work harder all the time. They have high blood pressure, so their heart has to work harder all the time and expands and expands. Like we said, the heart is a muscle. The muscle is kind of like a rubber band, and that keyword elasticity, just an easy way of saying is that it snaps back to its old shape. You take the rubber band, you stretch it, you let it go, it goes back. But there is a thing called material fatigue. And anybody who's ever, the analogy I use is, and this is really, really bringing it down. Obviously, in the world of, anatomy, physiology, and medicine, they have to do a lot more than this. But if anybody's ever owned a slinky, right? You remember the slinky, that little spring thing? And, all the other kids could get theirs to go down the steps and mine would go and just tumble. And it just never worked. That wasn't fair. But if you ever took a slinky, and because it's a coil, right? It's like a spring. And if you overstretch it a little bit, those coils spread out and it doesn't go all the way back. And sometimes materials that are, here's a fancy word, stretchy, if you stretch them too far, they can either snap on some level or just lose that bounce back. And that's what happens sometimes with the heart, especially in chronic enlargement, a cardiac hypertrophic myopathy. Cardiac hypertrophic, large, and a myopathy. Myo is muscle. So it's a deformation of the muscle not functioning well because it's too big. And so it's kind of, you've overstretched the balloon and it's lost its snap back.
And just to point out to all the group fitness instructors, Zumba instructors, marathon runners, who we may have just put the fear of God in by talking about this, it is extremely unlikely for any of this stuff to happen. The bad thing we're talking about, the possible heart attacks with exercise, risk of dying with exercise, extremely low. And in terms of marathon runners, there's not many reports of this happening, but there have been enough that's got my attention over the last few years. And I have not heard of a good explanation other than maybe the heart may not have may have lost some of its elasticity, and the blood may have lost some of its normal laminar flow through the chambers. And again, to my, in my mind, that kind of makes a little bit of sense, but I have not heard a better mechanism other than that. So I'm rolling with that for now until I see something. Thought maybe,
and you never want to discourage someone from exercising, but of course you always want to kind of bring that common sense on, bring that voice of reason along as well. There are commercial forces that really encourage folks to kind of throw that out the window. Probably the organization there's been several, the Kenneth Cooper Research Institute, the American Heart Association, the American College of Sports Medicine is at the very front of the industry. Frankly, I think they're kind of it's a very impressive name, American College of Sports Medicine, although frankly, I don't think they have a lot to do with sports. But they're at the front of these cardiac risk factors that when you exercise, yes, there is a chance that something bad will happen, and we can't make that go away. That's life. I mean, you don't want to go to the point where, like, I'm not going to get in my car today because I'm afraid of getting hit. Well, then just don't ever leave the house. I don't want to go that way. But risk is the chance of a bad thing happening. It's never zero. Right. But what we can do is minimize that by recognizing things. And what ACSM really put the two pieces of the puzzle together is that when there have been cardiac events tied to exercise, there's almost always two characters in play at the same time. One is that the exercise was of high intensity. In other words, in that moment, someone was working really hard. I bristle at the term, quote unquote, working hard because it's very general, but what we're talking about is their level of exertion in that instance. They were really hauling, or they were towards the end of a long run and really fatigued, and they were really pushing their body. So there was a high level of exertion, and most of the time, upon examination, and unfortunately sometimes autopsy, there was some underlying pathology. There was something else wrong. Unfortunately, you say that it's not until they get them in the examining room and they go, oh, wow, his aorta was narrow. Oh, wow, there was something wrong here. Oops, there was something. Now, not always. Some things are idiopathic. Idiots, we don't know. So an idiopathic means no known cause. We don't know why. Right. We're all human. We're all vulnerable. We all get to go home someday. And sometimes it's just that. So, but do you want to weigh that against, well, that's it, I've made up my mind, I'm never going to exercise again because I don't want to hurt myself while exercising? Well, where's that going to get you?
You're going home even sooner.
You're going home even sooner. So the best we can do, I've made a decision that I'm going to teach my class tonight. I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to assume some risk. Now, I'm going to minimize that risk by wearing my seatbelt, obeying the laws, not drinking before I drive, all those things that you're supposed to do. Is that going to guarantee me safe passage? No, but it will take my risk and bring it down to a minimum level that I'm just going to accept because I got to get on with my life and make a living. Exercise is a very, very manageable risk for the vast 99.999. So it's not something I would want to scare anybody, but also just to bring in, especially for the newer instructors who are trying to make a name for themselves. You see that person huffing, puffing in the corner, go over to him or her and say, you know what, march it out. Just walk in place for a little bit, encourage that. We're glad you're here. And we're doing something over here, and we're going overhead, and we're doing some squat jumps. You just chill, because you'll join us soon enough. Just keep coming. My son is a very accomplished martial artist with the Marines. Big plug for my boy and for the
nice.
He's a great kid, and he tells his beginner students all the time. Says, listen, every black belt is a white belt who kept showing up.
I like that.
Just keep showing up.
Yeah. And
in order to do that, and this was one of the founding principles of the NSCA, of which you and I are both fond. Mm-hmm. Number one rule of all training. Number one rule: stay healthy. Don't get hurt. Stay healthy so you can keep training.
You mentioned, I don't know, a few moments back, something about blood pressure. For those who may be not aware, blood pressure guidelines changed dramatically about a year and a half ago. What do you think about these new guidelines where they came out with this very interesting new term, stage 1 hypertension?
Yeah.
which is basically 130/80. They basically
130 over 80. Yeah, that used to be right in the ballpark for years and years, and it's now there's a couple ways of looking at it. Or there does seem to be some evidence that a blood pressure as a resting blood pressure as low as 132 over 84, which used to sound pretty reasonable, that if we sustain that hour after hour, year after year, can cause the heart to have to work a little harder. If I could just take a second and explain what blood pressure is, Joe, because I
please.
find out whenever two objects come in contact, those two objects effectively push against each other. And if I take my coffee cup and put it on the table, the cup is pushing down on the table. It is exerting pressure. Okay. Now, in the case of blood, it's kind of like pumping water through a garden hose. It's being pushed. That's what that heart muscle is doing. That chamber called a ventricle is squeezing, and it's forcing blood out of the ventricle into a tube called an artery. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, arteries away. So that artery is carrying blood. It's like a miniature hose that's carrying blood away from the heart. Well, the blood is pushing outward, right? It's, if you will, trying to escape. So the amount of push that the fluid is exerting against the walls of the artery is pressure, and it's caused by blood. It is blood pressure. We have to have some blood pressure. If we don't have any blood pressure, that artery is going to collapse like a long balloon. It's not like a rigid pipe. It's more like one of those long balloons that the guys can, like, you ever see the dudes at the parties and they can blow up the long balloon and twist it into like a horse or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like what an artery is. It's very, it would go very flaccid if it didn't have something inflating it like fluid. So we don't want that thing to just kind of collapse down. So we have to have enough outward push, that is to say, blood pressure, to keep it open. And then there's the sweet spot. Now you have folks who have a resting blood pressure of 90 over 60 or 100 over 70, and we can delve into what those numbers mean. That's how hard the blood is pushing outwards, and that's a real nice range, right? 100 millimeters of mercury of pressure while the heart is contracting, and a little bit less while the ventricle is refilling. So that means it's a good amount of push. You got a good strong circulation going, but it's not so. Now you get to a higher number. You say, okay, now it's 135 over 85. Well, now that means it's really having to push hard outward just to get through. And that's going to make the heart work harder. That outward push is going to irritate the inner lining of the artery, something called the tunica interna. It's a very delicate layer of cells that if you're pushing against it and then moving down, it's kind of like walking down the hallway while your shoulder's rubbing against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's happening all the time, surface is going to get irritated, almost like you rub your hands together constantly. You don't stop for 2 weeks, you're going to get really calloused up, and that's going to damage the inside of that very supple artery. And you start to get sclerosis or hardening, arterial sclerosis through high blood pressure, the outward push. If there's too much, there's the sweet spot. Then we go beyond that. We get too much of a necessary thing, and it can become a bad thing and a really bad thing. High blood pressure is no joke. So there does seem to be a good body of evidence that shows that even though we used to think, well, if these numbers, and if 120 over 80 is about normal, 140 over 90 is a little high, but 130 over 85 is okay. And now the Heart Association and the Medical Association is going, no, it really isn't.
Right.
You really got to get that back into those optimum ranges, because again, the heart never stops. You don't get to overexert for a while and then take a few days off. It just doesn't work that way. The heart has to, in a lifetime, the heart's going to beat somewhere around 3 billion times.
Yeah.
So to overexert it that often really has some chronic deleterious effects.
I look at these new names and starting with the previous guidelines, which there's no longer really around anymore, where they actually had the term pre-hypertension. Starting then, I look at these new phrases as a way to try to convey to people, hey, you got to take blood pressure seriously before it gets to 140 over 90. I think people weren't doing that. And that's why I think they're like, you know what, pre-hypertension wasn't cutting it. Let's call it what it really is. Stage 1 hypertension.
Yeah.
And that really got people angry. And they're like, oh, you mean to tell me now I got to go on a medication? And no, the guidelines literally didn't say go on a drug at 130 over 90. It's how about eating a salad? How about taking a walk, joining a gym?
Watching your salt. Yeah. Well, you went from calling it pre, meaning, oh, that's not me.
Yeah.
To now it is me. And so wait a minute, how did I join the club? I wasn't one of them. That was for other people. That wasn't me, not me. Maybe those other guys, but not me.
Oh, you're in the club now.
You're in the club now, and it's, oh, this stuff is getting real.
And blood pressure is so important. I mean, again, for those who may not know the connection, high blood pressure, number one cause of a stroke. And, that should be enough news right there to say, hey, I got to get my blood pressure under control. Good news. You don't have to do a lot of exercise to see a change in blood pressure. I had a buddy call me about a year ago, and like most people, he's stuck at his desk all day these days. He's running his own business. And he's like, dude, I just did my blood pressure. And I was like, I think he says it was like 190 over 90 or 100.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it was really high. And I said, you're in front of your desk 6 hours a day, more, if not more. And he's got employees and all that stuff. So I said, why don't you do this? Go take a walk around the block, come back in a half an hour and call me up and tell me what your blood pressure is now. Half hour later, 120 over 80. So
how about that?
It just took, a simple little 20, 30-minute walk dramatically lowered his blood pressure. I tell that story a lot to drive home the message that you don't have to run marathons to lower blood pressure. No. You don't have to, stay in the gym all day long. A little bit of exercise goes a long way, especially in terms of blood pressure. And for many times for blood pressure, less is more. I mean, you can get a bigger bang for, doing lower intensity. So, blood pressure, it's very interesting. I kind of like the new guidelines, but I know a lot of people don't. But I just think it's the medical industry is trying to prod people. Take better care of yourself. Look at what these numbers really mean now. So
I've had folks kind of go on the cynical way. They said, well, they're just trying to sell more medications. And I said, well, that's going to happen too. And would it be the only time in human history that a medical guideline was driven by money? Well, let's see.
Yeah.
What isn't?
Yeah.
But in this case, and I'm as cynical as anybody else, but in this case, it's a serious deal. And like you were saying, that sweet spot, 20, 25, 30 minutes of a brisk walk. And it doesn't have to be anything that's going to wear anybody out. One of my favorite mechanisms is I tell them, give them a scale of 1 to 10. I've had folks now, they're in the gym, they're training. Now they're going to be on vacation. I'm going to go see my daughter in California. I don't know if there's a thing on the resort. I said, do this. How hard do you think we worked today on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being you could do this in your sleep. 10 is you are about to collapse. How was our effort level today? About a 5, maybe a 6. I said, that's right where I want you to be.
There you go.
Take yourself a little walk. Do some jumping jacks if it turns on. Maybe get some of the hand weights. Walk up some hills. An aerobic step if it's in the clubhouse. However you manage to create your effort, keep it to about a 5 or a 6. And I will tell you, Joe, I've told people that who are 80, 85, 95. I've never had anyone in my life not know what that means.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the 1 to 10. If I told you that I just saw a movie and I gave it a 4, you know that I was not overly impressed. And if I saw a movie and I give it an 8.5, you go, wow, you must have really liked it. Everybody knows the 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
So just give yourself, work to about a 5 or a 6, work up to about 20, 25, 30 minutes a day, and take your time doing it. Take all the, work it. Always just what do we say? Stay consistency. It's one of the principles of the variables of exercise. We have the intensity of exercise, we have what we're doing, how often, and for how long, the frequency, intensity, time, and type. But one of my variables that I emphasize the most is consistency.
Hmm.
You and I both know there isn't an exercise in the world that I could do that I'm going to give you this weight. You're going to do this exercise and your biceps are going to blast. They're going to be big. They're going to be jacked. They're going to be ripped. And that's going to last for a year. But no, you have to be consistent. You can have a great workout on Monday. And if you don't work out that same muscle for 2 weeks, you're going to kind of be back to square one.
Yeah.
You know, that's the saying, you're only as good as your last workout. That's a little cliched, but it's not.
Yeah. It's got some
untrue.
truth in it.
It's got some truth in it. Yeah.
So again, blood pressure, serious, and it does have a relationship to, say, heart disease, number one killer in America, if not most first world nations. Can you speak a moment about women versus men in terms of heart disease? I was at the post office, true story. I'm at the post office a few months back, and the woman, I get talking to her, and she's saying, I said, "How you doing today?" And she says, "Well, I feel a little nauseous, and my stomach kind of feels a little queasy, and I have back pain." And she's telling me these symptoms, and my spidey senses begin to tingle.
Right.
I mean, she's telling me some very interesting and somewhat alarming symptoms that makes me think that she's possibly having a heart attack. Can you speak to that for the women who are, and I know we have actually a lot of women listening to us, women get different symptoms of heart attacks than men do, correct?
Different symptoms and different manifestations, possibly due to hormonal differences, certainly upon menopause, but just even the morphology, the architecture of the heart is different. Men typically have larger heart and a slightly different shape, actually. Women are more likely to have problems with the heart valves. Okay, so we mentioned how that ventricle will squeeze and push blood out into an artery. Well, the ventricle got blood by having another chamber called an atrium squeeze and push blood into the ventricle. So we have to have these structures called valves, just like you have in your tires or in your garden hose or in a musical instrument, that keeps things flowing the way we want it to and not any of the other ways. So we have these things called valves that let the blood out of the ventricle into the artery, and another valve is going to close so that the blood does not go back up into the atrium. We don't want the blood going back where it came from. We want it to move. It's kind of like a line, you keep it moving. Women are more likely to have trouble with the valves. So now you go back to having to overwork the heart. Well, I'm getting blood. Maybe it's coming from the lungs. It's filling up the ventricle. I want to push it out to the cells to deliver the oxygen, but some of it's backflowing. It's called a regurg or a regurgitation. I don't want to send the blood backwards toward the lungs. I want to send it out to the body. So whatever percentage of blood that's backing up, that's blood that's not getting delivered. So instead of delivering the right amount of blood, I'm down a percentage, and the heart's going to have to overwork. And again, going to cause an increase in pressure. The mass of the heart changes. We talked about hypertrophy. That works different. There's differences in the electric signals. And when, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on the whole things with the EKG. Everyone who has ever watched a medical show knows the little thing with the EKG where it, the heart beats and they get the little spike, and then the other little guys. Well, each one of those segments of an EKG signal means something. Women tend to get longer repolarization times. In other words, you get the little spike, oh, the heart just beat, and then you get the little break in between, ooh, and then the heart beats again. In women's cardiovascular disease, that interval increases. So it's not reloading as fast. So there's a little more downtime in between each heartbeat. And even if it's only a fraction of a second, it's a fraction of a second every time. I mean, the heart beats around once every second anyway, on average at rest, between 60 and 80 times a minute. So if you're supposed to be getting 70 heartbeats in a minute, but now it's slowing down a little bit and you're only getting 60 some, and it's not because the heart's getting stronger, it's because it's just taking longer to refill and it's called repolarize, kind of like reload the slingshot. That's going to bring things down. There's differences in again, the hormonal aspect. Is she using birth control? Is she smoking? So there's a multi-layered puzzle that has to come together there. But women can also, the onset of coronary disease in women tends to be a little more stealth, where the occlusions and the shutdown of the heart muscle is a little sneakier, and it can even be a little harder to detect. So women have to be very, very diligent. And I mean, we all should, but women have a higher susceptibility for this. It's actually, the term was microvascular coronary disease. So micro, really small. So the bad things that build up and block the arteries can start to happen in a really small scale to very small arteries, and kind of creep up more so in the women than in the men. And of course, all the same stuff, right? Excessive alcohol, lack of exercise, smoking is only going to multiply each of those. So, and then there's different conversations about the protective effects of estrogen and estrogen replacement. It does seem to have some efficacy. There are still a few studies that say, yeah, maybe not, but that's largely accepted that there's a good protective measure on that. So women have to be really diligent is kind of bottom line there.
No doubt about it. Related to that, a study came out about a year ago. Women are almost 30% less likely to get CPR if they have a heart attack in public. Men are less likely to do CPR on women. And I when I looked into this, I think this may be men not wanting to do CPR on women because women have breasts.
Yep.
And again, we live in this, this world of, the Me Too movement. I wondered if this is coming back to bite, unfortunately, women in the butt a little bit, because men are like, I don't know who that is. And, I have to do this. And when you think about it, the CPR dummies don't have breasts. I heard about it, even a company that was coming out with an attachment for the CPR dummies to hopefully get men to be more at ease if they ever had to do CPR. But so again, for the men who are listening to us, if they ever find themselves in that predicament, it's just something to think about. And you should still do the CPR. And related to that, I tell a story in almost every class I teach and seminar I give about the importance, obviously, of being CPR and AED certified, because that you never know when you're going to need that. Gee whiz, you could be Outback and something bad could happen. But there was a story about 3 years or so ago when a 22-year-old woman had died in a gym, and the person at the front desk of the gym,
I remember that one. Had no idea what to do.
Didn't know what to do. And oh my goodness. And so I make it a point of asking, these new personal trainers, hey, would you go in the ladies' locker room, if something bad happened like this? And you'd be surprised at how many of them actually say no. And that's why I bring that up.
In a New York second, you can fire me, you can yell at me. Someone's going down, she's not breathing.
Absolutely.
I'm on it. Trust me. It's not. I'm not worried about seeing something that somebody.
And
we're
that,
trainers.
That is, and again, I do a lot of sidebars when I do these podcasts, but that's a failure of the fitness industry, especially, I shouldn't say fitness industry, the gym industry, to adequately train the staff that actually are employed at the gym. I don't believe most gym owners tell people, hey, bad stuff can happen, and if you got to go in the ladies' locker room, if somebody's having a heart attack or a seizure, you can do that.
You bang on the door, you say, man coming in, here I come, and you keep your eyes down. You find your purse. She's not going to be hard to find. Someone is in a crisis like that.
Absolutely.
You have to intervene. I taught CPR for a number of years, and we actually had it. It was we taught it at the college in South Jersey, and it was actually a 2-credit class, so we spent a lot of time on it. And one of the things that our time gave us, so one of the things that you guys have, the truth is we could have covered the actual techniques in a third the amount of time that we were allotted, but it's a college and they needed credit, so they extended the time. Fine. One of the things that gave us was, you guys are in this safe environment in this college classroom. You can start making the decision now, that when that time comes, whatever that time may be, when that time comes, you're at the restaurant, you're in traffic, you hear something, oh my God, what's happening? You make the decision now, you're going to know what to do. Yeah. I'm going to make sure that I can enter the situation. It's not like someone's trapped on an electrical wire, because me getting killed isn't going to help
Right.
anybody. I
Right.
got my cell phone. I'm already hitting 911. I'm already saying, what's going on? What's happening? Is the
Right.
person conscious, unconscious? And I will tell you that every semester that I taught CPR, somebody acted on it by the end of the semester. In 2 occasions, absolutely saved a life. It was really cool. And one of them was in a restaurant, like one of these, mainstream chain restaurants.
Yeah.
And the dude started having a heart attack.
Yep.
And nobody knew what to do. None of the staff, none of the bartenders, the restaurant manager. And here's my student who's all of 19 years old saying, you do this, you back these people up, you go outside, wait for the ambulance, you go over here. And she started doing CPR on the guy. And
That's
no one else knew what to do. The protocol on CPR changes through the years in order not necessarily to make it the most medically effective, but to make it the most inviting.
Yes.
Let's just get people involved. And if nothing else, please get your cell phone out and punch 911.
People don't think like that. You're right. You got to emotionally prepare yourself for this. For most people, it'll never happen, but, think about these things, and you may find yourself one day in a situation where you need to be Batman or Batgirl for about 20 minutes. And,
for about 20 minutes.
It is something that I have heard stories over the years, and of where people actually have saved people's lives. So I know we're deviating away from the topic, but I think it's something that I think people need to be thinking about, because again, I don't think a lot of people are considering these possibilities, especially those who may work in a gym or who own gyms. I've actually run into people who own gyms, and when I bring this topic up, it's like they look at me like, you've got to be kidding me. It never even occurred to them. And I know that's not the norm for everybody, but I know there's some out there who they don't tell the front desk staff that, what would you do if somebody had a heart attack? So
I had a relative who worked in a public library, and I told my relative, well, I will do the AED training for you. So this had to be 15 years or so ago. They wanted to get an AED in the public library. I said, that's a wonderful thing. I'm a trainer. I will train everybody for you. Just happy to do it. And so she went back and she said, hey, my cousin will do this for everybody. No charge. We'll give him a cup of coffee and say hi, and he'll come in and do it for 4 hours. And somewhere around 1/3, it wasn't quite half, of the staff were vehemently opposed to putting an AED in the library. And one girl said so much as, we can't have that here. What if we need to use it someday? So that fear, and of course, I'm going, well, that would be all the reason that you would want to have it and maybe keep somebody from dying. It's kind of silly that way, but the fear of the unknown. And so, yeah, get CPR trained, go to a class. I mean, there's even videos on CPR just to kind of break the ice. And then I always suggest to someone, it's Red Cross, man. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
Get on the interweb and find a class and do the compressions and do the rescue breaths and get involved. That's somebody's relative. That's somebody who's, a father, a mother, a brother. They're going to have somebody who misses them. And I don't want it to be because I didn't try.
Right. That was a pretty weighty topic we just talked about. So let's switch gears.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
We handled it very well. What are some of the neatest things about the heart that you find most fascinating? Lightweight topic now.
I liken the heart to our very own UPS system. It's delivery, right? Your red blood cells are each one of it is a tiny delivery truck. And we have all these amazing pipelines that get so small that if we put them all, and if we put all of our arteries and our veins and our capillaries, it would circle the earth twice. So they're microscopically thin. And once upon a time, there was actually, and we've learned a lot about it. There's actually one of the little light anecdotes I have in my book is as to why we put this is a little off topic too, but again, it's lightening things up a little bit. We put a wedding ring on the left index finger because in the ancient Rome, it was believed there was something called the vena amoris, and to be amorous, amor is love. And it was thought to be a blood vessel that connected straight to the heart. So you were kind of claiming that vessel that was connected straight to your heart. As it turns out, it doesn't exist, but we still wear the rings anyway. And
last question.
Sir.
What are the 3 best things people can do to take care of their hearts?
Well, there's the one that you don't do, right? No smoky.
Right.
Some form of exercise. Just please do something. Yeah, get active, and I would also say, of course, there's the diet and the cholesterol aspect, but there's another kind of whole expansion of heart health that it's starting to recognize things like, oh, that area of stress management and community support. I read a fascinating book in the last year called Compassionomics, and it shows how family support, community support, a network is so valuable that someone, and there was a stat in it that just blew my mind. If someone having a heart attack who does not have family or a support network is 3 times more likely to die in the next 6 months as someone who had the exact same medical condition and has a good family structure. Connection. Keep your heart healthy that way. Fill your heart. Now, how someone does that is going to have to be up to them. That's part of why I think a lot of folks, you kind of get a 2-for-1 with some of these group exercise classes that are well run. There's a social aspect. Get happy. Find something that fills you personally up. Have some family, have some support. It may be, whatever that manifests, but there's a huge opening of that now, that we're not just machines. This is not an automobile. Have some stimulation in your life, yes. Don't overdo it. The positive outlook.
I agree. This has been interesting. Jim Menz, it's been always a pleasure to have you on the podcast talking about all the stuff that you are an expert on. And for those who can't get enough of Jim, I'm going to put links to his heart appreciation books in the episode notes for this episode, so you can check them out. Again,
you are very kind, sir.
They're great books. I mean, you have the nurse's heart appreciation guide, but again, I think these books are appropriate for everybody who's taking any kind of anatomy or physiology class. Great pictures, great trivia that most people haven't even thought of.
Where Valentine's Day came from and all like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have to have some fun, Joe. I was never that guy. I had a teacher like that in college. God bless him. But it was, first of all, it was statistics, and that was it was early morning, and I not necessarily was in the best shape every morning anyway. And he was so monotone, and it was painful. It's like, look, buddy, I always like sprinkling that stuff in there, or like you said, breaking down the words, because I think that concretizes it a little bit. It gives us a little more substance. Oh, is that where that comes from? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and it definitely gives us something we can latch on to.
It absolutely helps the learning process immeasurably. Because I'm like you, I like to know where the words come from myself. Your dad was a teacher. My dad worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer, so he was always big on the words as well.
Sure.
And I think that's where I get it from. I like to know where these words come from. So again, I can't speak highly enough about your books. Again, I'll put links to them there for people can check them out.
Very kind, Joe. I really appreciate words, especially coming from yourself, and not to make this like the mutual admiration society, but you've always been the straight shooter. And that's what I put your name on the boards in my nutrition classroom, my A&P class, probably 2 or 3 times a semester. I say, you got a question about this supplement, that product, this syndrome, just go to this dude, because he just calls it like he sees it. And then, I use the term to describe what you do the same way that Dr. Maz did in his book on Compassionomics. He said, I'm not writing about what I think. I'm writing about what I found. I don't have a dog in this fight. Here it is. This is what the evidence is showing. Take it, don't take it, but that's what's out there right now.
Excellent. Jim, always a pleasure. And I'll see you again on another episode.
Absolutely, sir. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you. You take care.
Okay, buddy.
So there you have it. What'd you think? I actually enjoyed this interview an awful lot. I especially liked all the trivia that we discussed this week, as well as the other issues, which I think need to get out to people. But let me know what your thoughts are on this. I'll be glad to read your emails. Again, you can email me to either of my websites, joe-cannon.com or supplementclarity.com. I'm going to put links to Jim's book in the episode notes for this, which again can be found at joe-cannon.com. Just search the podcast section and you can find them yourself. And with that, I'm going to bring this episode to a close, with the exception of the quote of the week, which pretty much sums up everything we talked about this week. And it goes like this. Think about it. Heart disease and diabetes, which account for more deaths in the U.S. and worldwide than everything else combined, are completely preventable by making comprehensive lifestyle changes without drugs or surgery. Dr. Dean Ornish. And if you don't know his name, Dr. Ornish was the very first physician to show a reversal of heart disease. And he's written several books, which again, I'll throw a link to in the episode notes so you can check them out. With that, I'll bring this episode to close. Until next week, I'm Joe Cannon. Go out, be safe, and where you can, do try to make a difference.